Hi, welcome to a new video. In the last video, we have created a cluster, a one master node, one worker node setup. We have done using kubeadm. If you have not seen that one, I will give a link in the description or else in the I button, somewhere else in the video. In this video, what we will do, we will access this cluster from a different machine. So quickly, I will show you my cluster setup. This is the worker node, this is the master node. In case if you are seeing that different IP, because of I have deleted that previous cluster which I have created in the last video because I already have a setup, and but the everything is same, the configuration everything is same, nothing is different. And this is the jump server. So in the last video we have logged into the master node and we are running this get nodes and different commands. We are able to see the details. Right now what we're going to do is that we will access this cluster, we will run the same command from a different machine. Okay, now make sure you have a connectivity or security groups or a connectivity between these two machines. If you have configured this machine in a different subnet or different VPC, make sure you have a connectivity in some 6443 I think in that port, so that this machine can talk to this machine. Okay, so right now we will configure some cluster role bindings and create some user so that you can access this cluster. So before creating different resources, there will be a couple of term will be coming up, such as cluster role bindings. So what is cluster role? Cluster role roles, any role, be it normal role or cluster role. A role defines set of permissions you can do on set a couple of resources. So let me show you. If you do this thing, so if you want to know what are the resources currently present in your Kubernetes cluster, suppose you have pod, you have nodes, you have services, you have ingress, different things. Now you may ask, what are the maximum resources present in my cluster? Just run this command, you'll see all these are called resources. Now a role defines what kind of permission you are able to do each and every resources. Now if I do this thing, let me just do this roles. Just do role. You see there are total 4 things coming up: cluster role bindings, cluster roles, and role bindings roles. So ignore these two for now. Let's see what are the cluster role present in my cluster in by default. Now remember one thing: cluster role and these roles. The main difference is that cluster role is applicable to whole cluster. It cannot be namespaced. Means you cannot specify that a cluster role can be only applied in the default names or a particular namespace. For that you need the roles. So I will create a cluster role so that I can access the whole cluster, not a specific namespace, from my jump machine. So I will create a cluster role for that one. Now these are the cluster role which by default present. Now ignore these two, I have created this one previously. So if you see, this cluster admin is already present. So let's check what inside of this one. Yes, why? So what it means? kubectl get cluster roles. We are requesting for a cluster roles. Cluster role names is this one, and output is YML. So if you see, these are called rules or permissions, you can say. So cluster role or role contains a set of permission you can do for a certain resources. So in cluster role, cluster admin, it tells that API group will be all. It will be applicable to all API group. Resources will be all. Verbs will be all. Non-resource URL will be all, and verbs will be all. Means you can perform anything in the cluster if you have a cluster admin role. So this role comes by default. In order to create that one, what we will create is that we will create a cluster role binding. So you can create a cluster role by specifying what kind of permission a cluster role, uh, what kind of permission you set for certain resources. And cluster role binding tells that who are the user will use that cluster role to do certain activity. So I hope this you will got my point, right? So cluster role tail defines the set of permissions you can do on a particular resources, and cluster role binding tells a certain user will use this particular cluster role to do some activity. Let's see what are the cluster role binding we have. So cluster role, these are the cluster role bindings we have. Okay. Now, if you see, there is another called cluster admin. Okay. This is also by default created. So if you want to see what's inside this one, just do this one also output YML. Now, it tells that it is referencing to this cluster admin role, which is a cluster role type, and it is comes under this group. So this kind can be group, user, or service account. So we'll create a user. So in this video we will create a cluster role binding by referencing this cluster admin role, which is by default present. So for that I have, remember one thing, right now also we have not configured our jump server to connect. We are still in the master node. So in the master node I already have written one file to create this cluster role binding. Let's quickly vi that one. So what it tells, API version you can find by running kubectl API resources, and the kind is cluster role binding. So we are binding a cluster role with a set of users. For us it's only one user right now. So name cluster admin RB for role binding I'm given. So this name can be given anything you want. Kind, so subject the kind. So who will copy this? So there is two options, one is subject, one is role reference. So who are the people who will reference this role? So it will be user, and username I have given it admin -user. Okay. API group is the RBAC, role based access control, and role reference, it is referencing the role of cluster admin, which is a cluster role. So if I deploy this thing, it will, if I run kubectl apply -f and this file name, it will create a cluster role binding for this user with referencing to this cluster admin role. Let's do that. So let's just deploy next thing. See, cluster admin RB is created. To verify this thing, let's check our if it's created or not. You see, cluster admin RB. So we have created just now, 19 seconds ago. Now you may ask, like, where is the user? Do we need to create a user? So in Kubernetes there is nothing called a authentication authorization system. Like you might have a set of username or password you can set and you can access it. It's not like that. So uh, you create role bindings or cluster role bindings by defining set of service account or groups or user, and you create kubeconfig file on this master node, and take the kubeconfig file, place it in your jump server to access the cluster. So now we have this cluster admin role binding. Now in this thing, in this admin user, we have mentioned our username is admin user. So we need to generate kubeconfig file for that user. So whenever we will access any cluster with that config file, it will go to this RBAC, it will verify all these details, which permission it have, and it will see the details. So let's just create a kubeconfig file for this user. For that you need to write sudo kubeadm, and meanwhile you can just do help -help to see the more details. Okay, kubeconfig, then it will be user, client name will be our this thing. So remember one thing, these two things needs to be same. Okay, so whatever you have mentioned in your user, like admin user, ADM, whatever ABCD, you need to mention over here. So it will whenever you will copy this thing and paste in your jump server, it will verify the same in the behind the scene in the Kubernetes. So if you run this thing, you'll see there is a kubeconfig file created for this user. So let's go line by line. So this is a certificate of the cluster certificate. This is the server API or control plane 6443 is running over here, and the user is admin user, which is Kubernetes. So current context is this one, and these are the client data which defines the user. Now let's copy this thing, and now let's go to your jump server, which I already have logged in. So I don't have any kubeconfig file over here, so I'll just quickly create a folder and go inside this folder. Remember, you need to create this folder inside your home directory. Okay, so right now I will just create a config file over here. Let me just copy this thing, just copy, insert, paste. Now nothing has been changed. Nothing. The master node doesn't know that we have pasted this thing over here. Okay, so if you see, let me just cat this config file over here. So it is created for the admin user. So just clear the screen. Okay, now if I run this thing over here, the thing will be shown. Now what is happening is that whenever you are running this kubectl get nodes, everything goes to the Kubernetes API with these config details. So it will go to my this master node or cluster. It will check from which user the request is came, and it will check what are the roles it assigned in the cluster. We have created cluster role bindings, right? So we have mentioned a username over here. So whenever the Kubernetes will identify, okay, this request has come from the admin user. It will identify, okay, admin user is assigned to the cluster admin role. So I can give you the details. So in this way, we can access a cluster as a cluster admin. If you want to restrict yourself or create a user with for a particular namespace, you can create role, then role bindings, and then you can create the same. You can mention a username over here, and you can create this kube config file, and you can copy that one and paste that one in your jump server, and you will be able to see only for one namespace. That is for the role. Now if you ask, like, how do you know I have the whole permission? No, for that you run kubectl auth can I. Now you need to mention two things. I will tell you why, and also you can mention all namespaces. Yes, what it tells is that kubectl auth, so the authorization you have. So right now kubectl is using this config file which we have just configured. So kubectl auth can I, so it just checking whatever the things we have configured, it have the permission to all resources, all permission, and all namespace. So generally you can also specifically mention list ports, or so that I can also do. Let's check if that is works. Yes, so you can mention specific thing also. I have mentioned all things because we have created a cluster admin user. So I can do everything inside the cluster, each and every resources, it will be applicable. All namespace means I can do anything on any namespace. So now if you create a role with for a specific support default namespace, if you do this thing and all namespace, it will also false, because it will only applicable to certain namespace. Okay, so this is all. This is a short video for to create a cluster admin role bindings and generate a kubeconfig file to access the cluster. In upcoming some videos, we will cover in details for this RBAC, Kubernetes RBAC, how we can configure, how we can give set of permissions, service account. We will cover in some videos. I'm not also sure when we can cover, but that's for this thing. So from the next time, I will use this jump server to access our cluster, not the master node. I'll only connect this jump server to access. So you can do anything. So you can do get ns. You can check all the like you can just do anything. So these are the all ports running. So everything will work fine. So that's all for this video. We'll catch you guys on the next video to configure the dashboard or any other plans. I also don't know what kind of plans I have. So if I have any plans, I will update you. Okay. Thanks for watching. I will catch you on the next video.